Hi everyone, it's Raylene from RTO Doctor, and today we're going to talk about the volume of learning as it applies to individual units of competency or groups of units of competency as opposed to a full qualification. This has been as a request from one of our followers in our live stream 30 Days, 30 Tips series. And I will, because it's become a request from a specific person, I'll try and contextualize it as much as possible to their specific industry area while also making it relevant to some of the more common course areas. So the way that people will usually contemplate the duration of training that is required for the full volume of learning for short courses involving units of competency or skill sets can vary quite a lot. Sometimes it will be guided by nominal hours. Nominal hours, of course, are a mechanism for funding usually only. However, sometimes they are also used as a guide for what is acceptable for the structured face-to-face training component. It should also have on top of that included things like any self-study, any assessment activity, any work-based training. Nominal hours again are a funding mechanism, but they're a good guide as to what would be expected for a standard target group who are learning something for the first time in a structured face-to-face classroom environment. Now, of course, if your target group come from a different country, so for example, their first language is not English and they're perhaps job seekers or something similar to that, there will be additional requirements or support needs that they have that need to be incorporated into the volume of learning as well. Some other considerations might be what is expected or required by the training and assessment strategy itself. So, for example, if we take first aid, the first aid assessment conditions and performance evidence require, for example, that each person in a class must conduct or demonstrate satisfactory performance of 2 minutes of uninterrupted single rescuer cycles on an adult, and the same again for an infant. So that's a minimum of 4 minutes CPR that has to be demonstrated by each student in the class. Now, typically the first aid unit was delivered over 1 day in terms of face-to-face delivery and assessment by first aid providers, but what we're finding is that they are having to deliver it over a couple of days now to accommodate the assessment conditions in the units for the number of students that are enrolling in each class. So, for example, if you've got a class of, say, 20 students doing first aid, and each student has to do 2 minutes of uninterrupted single rescuer cycles on an adult, and then they also have to do another 2 minutes of uninterrupted single rescuer cycles of CPR on an infant mannequin. Already that's 4 minutes per student times 20 students, you get the idea. They also have to, as part of the assessment conditions now, demonstrate at least 2 simulated first aid scenarios that are relevant to their workplace. So if you've got again 20 students in a classroom and they all have to demonstrate at least 2 simulated assessments, you'll find that the duration or the volume of learning for that particular unit is going to blow out to more than 1 day now. It makes it a little bit challenging for some providers because there are still many providers out there who are delivering the practical over 1 day, meaning that you're not financially competitive in the market anymore. But of course, with ASQA coming up and doing the National Strategic Review into short courses, I feel fairly confident that those providers will get picked up sooner rather than later in the audit process. Now, to be a little bit more specific for the person who requested this information, another way that you can contemplate the volume of learning overall for your specific courses, and they were in traffic management in Western Australia, would be to look at the nominal hours and use that as a guide for the face-to-face structured learning. Also look at your Main Roads WA service agreement for training providers, and while there is some conflict between what it requires in some sections as opposed to others, and then your requirements in relation to the principles of assessment and rules of evidence, you could somehow work out a duration of training for those short courses. So for example, if you were to look at something like basic worksite traffic management, for example, where before a student can be eligible to work in the workplace as a qualified basic worksite traffic manager, they need to have completed a probationary period on live roads in Western Australia before they are eligible to receive their full certification from Main Roads WA. Now, if you look at the training provider service agreement with Main Roads WA, what you can also see is that they mandate the use of logbooks for assessment, and those logbooks have to be conducted on live roads over a period of time. But if you also look at the course durations that are specified in the service provider's agreement, you'll see that this same course has a course duration of 1 day. And that's what I mean by the conflict that is apparent in the service provider's agreement. So how do you work out the volume of learning in relation to that particular course then? Well, I would personally look at the nominal hours that are required for each unit, and I would have a look at the amount of training that's required for each target group. So if I've got people who are second language learners, for example, or who have language literacy numeracy issues, I may increase the learning hours and the assessment hours. I would also incorporate the time required by Main Roads WA before you can sign off on a unit of competency. So if the probationary period is 3 months, for example, of experience as a probationary traffic controller, the volume of learning for that course would be a minimum of 3 months work-based training. You may have 1 day of face-to-face classroom training, and you may have a couple of days of self-study and things like that. But the practical component would be a minimum 3 months, because that's what's required as a probationary person under the Main Roads WA accreditation scheme. Hopefully that answers your questions in relation to the volume of learning and how it applies to units of competency and short courses that are not a full qualification. ASQA does provide some guidance in relation to this area in its fact sheet, although it probably could be further expanded to be a little bit more meaningful and relevant to providers delivering these courses. The fact sheet was designed more so for qualifications than units of competency. If you would like to confirm that your volume of learning is adequate, please don't hesitate to contact us at Ask Your Doctor. We'd be more than happy to walk through it with you and confirm that you are or you aren't on the right path, and help you find a way to make sure that you can deliver a volume of learning that is appropriate to your target group and meet the principles of assessment and rules of evidence in the future. Thank you for following us today, and I look forward to seeing you tomorrow with a new quick tip for 30 days. Thanks very much. Bye for now.